Recording. Hello, 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 hello. This is Jennifer J Hammond.
Great. How are you doing?
I'm so excited to have you. Oh my gosh. First
Oh,
of all, I
thank
want
you
to tell
so
you
much.
just a tiny bit. This is Andrew Winkler. He started college at 15. He taught his first course at 16. He became a professor at Stanford and Columbia. He started a company selling bomber jackets to dogs and started several other companies. And he's an inventor. He's so many things. But today we want to talk a little bit about selling and what that is and why that's so important. So welcome, 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 Andrew.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for the
So,
invitation.
yeah, of course. So let's jump in. The key to selling, especially as in real estate, we're always selling. You're selling the location, the home, the this,
Hmm.
but we're also serving our clients. So one of those keys is getting inside their head. How do we get inside their head?
So it turns out that people are always showing us who they are. And there are, in particular, ways that people walk that tell you what matters most to them. And there are also ways that people gesture, and those can tell you what they seek most. And so by piecing those together, you can actually know quite a bit about what matters to them, the way they think, the way they make their decisions, the way they need to be sold and need to be served.
Well, this is really helpful because, of course, as real estate agents, we constantly we're walking around a house, we're walking inside a
Hmm.
house. So can you give us some examples? Like, what if somebody's walking really fast?
So there are four kind of characteristic walks,
Okay.
and there are two that tend to be on the fast side. So um, the the people who are walking fast typically are either walking like they're a charging bull, or like they're I call it a bounce. Think of Tigger, where it's also a very energetic walk, but it's um, uh, instead of being tightly focused and goal directed, it's more taking in the people. And I mean, think of Dick Van Dyke playing Bertie in Mary Poppins. If you
Yes.
remember, where he has this kind of bounce to him, where he's engaging everybody he comes in contact with, um, and so both of those will be walking fairly fast, but with very, very different kinds of energies.
That's really helpful. And I think probably I've had both of those. Number
Uh-huh.
one, sometimes I'm the Tigger and I'm like, oh no, I need to get everybody focused because
Uh-huh. Yeah.
nobody's staying focused. And it's funny when you say Dick Van Dyke, the first thing I think about with Mary Poppins and Dick Van Dyke is and if I could sing, I would sing the song I Love to Laugh.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Everybody's laughing, and I think that's also so I'm curious when you look at behavior. So what about okay, now I'm down a bunny trail, but I still can't help it. So if
Yeah.
people laugh, there's all sorts of different ways that people laugh. Like if you're showing real estate and you're trying to get in their head, they're laughing. Now are they laughing politely, like in Mary,
Uh-huh.
like do they laugh like a snake? Do they laugh like this? Are they laughing because they're trying to be polite, or are they laughing because it's really genuine? Do you have any?
Right. That's not something I've really thought about, but it's super insightful and really interesting. It would be interesting to explore that and see if there's a connection.
I'm sure there is. It's just
It seems likely, yeah.
you know, just because and I've also learned that getting inside someone's head when they're like I ask a lot of questions when I take people through a house, so they really love such and such, and they'll admire it. And then
Uh-huh.
what I've learned is, that they might have admired it, but they were just being polite. It's not something that
Uh-huh.
they would like,
Right.
but they definitely think that was really nice, that
Uh-huh.
aspect. That
Good for them.
yeah, good for those people, but that wouldn't be me. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
uh-oh, what happened here? But so I ask a lot of questions because again, I have definitely not mastered all the different and I think let's talk about gestures, So the four styles of gesture: the poke, the cleave, the claw, the wing. I don't like, for me, one, you have to help us understand what those are, but two, I've learned that you want to watch them, but you also want to ask a lot of questions because
Oh,
I
absolutely.
I don't seem to find that they are consistent. But I want to know,
Well,
what are the gestures?
one quick thought. You were talking about uh asking a lot of questions. And the bouncing walk and the charging walk, those are characteristics of people who initiate, like extroverts. The other two walks are typical of introverts. And there's this great saying: if you don't know what an introvert is thinking, you haven't asked. And if you don't know what an extrovert is thinking, you haven't been listening.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So that's sort of the balance. Now, uh, so if you notice the way I gesture, you know, hands kind of like a claw.
Yeah.
That's typical of people who are knowledge seekers. Um, and on the other hand, you'll see if you ever watch Bernie Sanders, he's a great example of this. He kind of gestures like this, as though his hands were wings, and that's the hallmark of identity seekers, people for whom what's most important is being true to themselves, idealistic, diplomatic kind of people.
Nice.
Uh, there's also, you mentioned the poke. Think Bill Clinton for that one. Um, that's the hallmark of the improviser. That's somebody who's a sensation seeker, and he famously got himself into trouble seeking sensations. But they're really good at tactical things and very focused on the here and now. And
Mm.
so uh, the claw is more of a strategic thinker, and you're going to sell differently to somebody based on whether they're strategically thinking, you know, towards a more distant goal versus really focused on what's right now, what's the
Right.
opportunity in this moment. And so then you mentioned also the cleaver. That's the hallmark of security seekers. They'll also gesture like their hands, like they're holding reins, trying to ride a horse. Um,
Ah.
and for them, safety and security and making sure things go right and don't go wrong are what really matter to them. And so, you know, the facet of a house that will appeal to each of these different types is obviously very different.
Well, definitely. And it's interesting that you say that because I just actually today I got a message from a real estate agent and she spent 6 months working with this buyer and she said, I'm quitting. I'm giving up on this buyer. And it was so
Hmm.
interesting to me. I said, you know, why? Why? And she said, well, I just don't think the buyer's serious about buying. And it's funny, it's something
Ah.
I've known for a long time. And I thought, I'm not positive. I mean, I don't know because I haven't been there with them, but I'm not positive that it's the buyer's fault because I wouldn't be
Hmm.
surprised if what you're explaining, even she's reading the body language
Hmm.
incorrectly.
Yeah. Yes. Because for some people, uh, it'll be a very logical decision. For some people, it will really be more of a heartfelt kind of reaction. Um, some people like surprises. Some people don't like surprises. um, there's also there are people who feel anxious if a decision hasn't been made yet. But on
Right.
the other hand, there are people who will feel anxious if a decision is too rushed. And um, there are people who are really kind of focused towards giving and taking orders, and really tend to ignore questions, really. But others, answering and asking questions is what it's all about, and they tend to ignore orders. And so, you know, again, you kind of have to approach them differently. And depending on what your own sort of natural state is, it'll either be a natural thing or something where you kind of have to reach across the divide.
And well, and it's funny because I have found that that is really important. I love to, and it's one of the things I learned really early. I've been doing real estate for 27 plus years now. And I remember
Mm.
in my first 5 years, I think I messed up on some really things that like later in my career, I realized, oh, that was my fault
Uh-huh.
because I
Hmm.
didn't ask a question or because I interpreted again body language
Right. Yeah.
that like in if like from my viewpoint, if I have a buyer and they didn't buy in 6 months, I just kind of laugh. I have one of my favorite clients and he loves to brag that it took him over 10 years to find his home. He loves to brag. And he's like, and
Uh-huh.
Jennifer never gave up on me. And you know, I set boundaries. I'm like, I'm not going to give you all
Right.
time and,
Right.
you're going to have to do things on your own. I'm going to give you homework assignments and blah, blah. But he was always a collaborator, but I had to really pull that out of him to also, I mean, there were times I remember thinking, I wonder if he's going to go find another real estate agent after all these years. And he sent me so many clients, but a lot
Mm,
of it had to do with overcoming the confusion because he's very different than me. I'm somebody
yes.
who makes fast decisions. I can't tell you how many
Right.
times I've seen a house once and be like, yep, that's it. I'm buying it. And
Uh-huh.
other people can't do that fast. For him,
I
it's different.
I had a friend who was a chef that cooked at the table in a restaurant in
Oh
Long
yeah.
Island, and his kind of slogan was, "You never know who's going to leave a big tip, but you always know who's going to get it."
Nice.
So that was his outlook. Every customer might be the one that gives you a big tip,
That's
but
right.
it's going to be you that gets it regardless.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And the thing is, I've also just learned that, everybody sees viewpoint. If you can see things from other people's viewpoint, like sometimes I waited tables all the way through, like, well, all the way
uh-huh.
through high school, all the way through college. I waited tables for over 10 years. And it was funny because I think I was a really horrible waitress in the beginning. And
Uh-huh.
I didn't see myself as a bad waitress until
Hmm.
I had made a mistake and another waitress turned and snapped at me. And she said, you might be doing this just to pass some time until you get to and she kind of did her quote unquote, your real
Uh-huh.
job. She
Right.
said, this is my job and I take a lot of pride in it. And I
Hmm.
remember feeling very ashamed because I thought,
Yeah.
wow. And she said to me, how would you like to be treated, as the person sitting in the restaurant? And I remember
Hmm.
realizing if you shift your viewpoint to somebody else's viewpoint, often, again, and then just like a buyer in real estate or, even a
Hmm.
seller, if you shift it from the real estate agent's point of view to the other person's point of view, from the waiter's point of view to the
Uh-huh.
person who's experiencing it and think, well, how would I like to be treated or how would I like to look at it? And again, everybody's different and the way that they
Hmm.
make decisions or they do it. But we all know
Right.
that we would love to, have somebody who's putting the extra effort in, whatever that extra effort means to that person. And that changed the way that I behaved. It changed the way I acted. And I think that's also one of those big learning things is we all want to learn to be better.
Hmm. You're
So
making a really key point about the golden rule,
yeah,
which is on the one hand, you do want to treat people the way you want to be treated. But on the other hand, if I'm following the golden rule uh, uncritically, I'll cook a delicious steak dinner for my vegetarian friend
right,
who will not appreciate it or feel valued or cared about.
right,
Most likely will be offended.
right.
So it's discerning how others want to be treated and treating them that way that really kind of takes us to the next level there.
And I agree. Actually, somebody recently named it the platinum rule. And it's funny because I actually
Uh-huh.
embodied this, and this is also what I was trying to say earlier in my career. I learned
Uh-huh.
the hard way was about communication. And what I was going to say to you
Hmm.
is I learned because I also was somebody who it took me a long time to get into the whole text messaging thing. Everybody else was text
Hmm.
messaging way before I was. And but once I learned to text message, then I realized, oh, this is from my viewpoint, I thought this is the most unintrusive way to be
Hmm.
on someone's, to be at the top of their radar if there's something going on in real estate they should probably know about, not
Uh-huh.
lost in their email, but also not forcing them to have to pick up a phone and go through the pleasantries and all the time to talk
Uh-huh.
to me. So I
Right.
thought I was being very considerate, again, using the golden rule of treat someone else like I want to be treated, blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
But what I realized in the platinum rule is treat someone the way they want to be treated,
Yes.
not the way, just like cooking a steak for a
Uh-huh.
vegetarian. I mean, a steak is fantastic if that's what you're into and that's what you love. But what I
Hmm.
also found, because I got yelled at by, again, like I said, I made my mistakes and I got yelled at from more than one client who's like, why are you text messaging me? Or why can't you just pick up the phone and call me? And I was like, I was trying to be considerate, not
Uh-huh.
like interrupting your day 3 times because there was new listings that I didn't know if you were interested in, or because there was an update on your mortgage, or I was
Right.
trying to be polite, and they're like, just pick up the phone. It's the most important thing. And then I've also been yelled at from other people calling me saying, don't call me. I'm at work and I'm a lawyer and I'm blah, blah.
Uh-huh.
You know, I'm very important. Stop it. Don't call me. And I realized it just became one of my standard questions. How would you like me to communicate with you?
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Text, email?
when you're punching every button 3 times, it can, really be a problem having to text and not.
Right. Which most people, if you don't know what that means, then you're probably not old enough to understand what we're talking about.
She,
But
she did
yeah,
mention when you first started texting, and back in the day, it was a
it's
much more
true.
cumbersome technology than it is now.
Yeah, because now it's so easy, it's ridiculous, and now you can voice like da 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 da, boom, it's gone. I mean, but I realize the platinum rule is so much more important than the golden rule, and the fact that you should
Hmm.
find the way that people want to be treated, and that's why I think like what you've been talking about is so important to find out how are they gesturing, find out how are they walking, and find out how you can build a rapport with people if you're gonna try to sell them anything.
Yes. So there are a couple of other walks that we
Oh
didn't
yeah.
touch on, and those the reason those matter is because they're the walks of people who tend to be responders, people who typically are not the first person to initiate an interaction with someone they don't know. Somebody that kind of likes to let things unfold a little bit to understand the situation before just jumping right in. And so for those, there's one of the sort of like the in charge, really focused more on giving and taking orders. And for that, it's a glide. So if I don't know if you watched Game of Thrones in the very
Yeah.
first episode, the very first season, Lady Stark is walking through the castle, and it's like she's walking on air. It's this glide. It almost feels like there must be a conveyor belt somewhere under her that is moving her through the castle. Um, and on the other hand, the ones that are sort of more like the Tigger, except the less outgoing, walk in kind of a stroll. And an example I like to give for that is if you ever saw The Invention of Lying with Ricky Gervais, that's his sort of style. So it's
Troll.
all like Tigger, it's sort of taking everything in, but the Tigger type is really focused on the people, whereas the stroll is really kind of noticing everything.
I had a lot of people who stroll, that's for sure, in real estate.
Oh
And
yeah.
notice every little detail. I mean, it also helped me sometimes because I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't notice that spot on the ceiling,
Oh
or
huh.
oh yeah, I didn't see that crack. There are definitely things that, and that
Hmm.
it's important to, again, I love that. So there's, yeah, 4 different walks. I love the Tigger walk, but that's just because I'm a little bit like Tigger. I like the bouncy,
You,
bouncy, bouncy, bouncy,
yay.
those kind of things. So you produce films, you've hosted radio shows, you've done stand-up comedy. I mean, you've done all sorts of things, and you also host a podcast right now. Now I Get It with Dr. A.
Yes,
So
that's
will you
right.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I've taken a number of classes where I was just wondering what's the rest of the story. And so now I get it. What I'm exploring is just various things in the world of ideas and kind of what the rest of the story is. And so lately, I've been talking about the same things I'm talking about today. How you can understand personality by watching people walk and gesture, but then how you can go from there to understanding precisely what their thought processes are like, and even more, how they want to feel valued and appreciated and even loved, and how conversely they'll feel unappreciated and unvalued and unloved. And that's obviously that's about sales, but it's also about every other relationship, whether it's friends or intimates or coworkers or team members, employees, boss, everything in life kind of is relationships. And I know I'm preaching to the choir on that one.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
yes.
and so it's really crucial to kind of, it's kind of like we all have our own wavelengths. And so if you're sending on a wavelength that they're not receiving on, it might as well not. Do I have time for a story about that?
Yes, yes,
I
please.
what kind of got me thinking about all this in the first place was I had a relationship which at the time I really valued, and it was falling apart. And I don't want to get too much into relationships, but I decided I was going to try the five love languages, if you've ever heard of those.
Yeah, yeah.
So I decided every day I was going to do five things, one from each category. And I did this for several days. But then I got curious. So I asked her about her experience, which was a mistake. It was too soon. So she launched into a criticism of my efforts, uh, except
Sorry.
that except that she only criticized three of them. She hadn't even noticed the other 12.
Oh,
It was
wow.
like they hadn't even happened. But the three that she did notice turned out to match exactly her what's called cognitive function, because most of her time, the way her brain is used is she's thinking about what needs to happen when,
Yeah.
laying things out in a sequence. And so when you're that type, if you love somebody, you're always thinking about what you need to be doing for them.
Mm.
This is what Chapman calls acts of service. And so there was this dovetailing, and I'd done enough study of personality that it crystallized for me what was going there. So I got curious, and over and over and over again, the pattern just kept recurring. Um, and so, uh, yeah, if you're not on that wavelength, it's like it hadn't happened.
Well, and it reminds me of like AM FM radio. You may have
Uh-huh.
like you got the number right, but it's on AM versus FM. It's a
Right.
different, totally different frequency, and you're
Uh-huh.
not going to get it. And I think that it's interesting because you said something that's really powerful, and I really do believe that our whole existence in this world is about relationships. And okay, me goosebumps. I think that one of the things that also clicked for me in real estate when I started to become really successful was I realized that the other real estate agents, the relationship with the other real estate agents was
Hmm.
so, so important. Even, I mean, quite frankly, even the ones that we didn't necessarily get along. And
Yeah.
or I didn't like, it's so easy, I think, in some ways to get along with someone you either admire or someone who's like you. But
Hmm.
when it's somebody that you don't like, or that for some reason they've done something you thought was, unethical or unfair, or, there's so many things in real estate, emotions
Hmm.
run high. You're talking about money, you're talking about where someone lives. I mean, there are just so
Yeah.
many things. And what I realized was if I could always find a way to create a relationship, even if I just totally didn't, like you're talking about the different love languages, the way,
Uh-huh.
again, the same thing. I would have to talk to different agents. And one of the first things I found is I'd be like, okay, so one of our key things is communication. So how do you like to be communicated with? And I'd ask
Uh-huh.
real estate agents that because,
Uh-huh.
again, I got yelled at more than one time because I was calling when I should have been emailing, or I was text
Hmm.
messaging when I should have been calling. And I was like, what do you mean? And again, I find that it's just somebody else's experience. At first, I had a couple people tease me because I say awesome or whatever. And they say, oh, you're
Hmm.
so young. I'm like, I'm not really that young, but thank you. And then I realized it doesn't matter. I just need to find out what is their communication way, what is,
Yeah.
and I want to say love language only to say that it is like a different language,
Hmm.
and in Washington, DC, we have all these cultures. I mean, I think probably in my second year, I did this deal with these Italians, and they were so persistent. I probably shouldn't even say this on the podcast, but they're like, you're drinking red wine with us, right? If you're not drinking red wine, we can't trust you. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
what? I don't know if that's totally legal for all of us to be drinking red wine at this moment, although I'm not signing anything. But I
Uh-huh.
mean, it was so funny because I realized just like cultural differences and culturally language barriers and
Right.
love languages, learning to communicate and learning to how to create a relationship. I mean, it's to me, it's one of the keys to a happy life.
It is. And the people we don't like are some of our most valuable interactions for a couple of reasons. One is what really pisses us off is when we see our own faults in someone else. And so we get that they provide a map for us for our own personal development,
Yes.
um, just by setting us off. But there's another phenomenon too, which is that um, we tend there are 8 of different cognitive functions, and they're all associated with these wavelengths I was talking about. And everybody uh, really has one that they're really strong and mature with. And you live long enough to get mature with like 4 of the 8, and then you die. You never live long enough to really fully develop all 4. And so what happens is you overvalue the ones you're good at, and you kind of downplay the ones you're not so good at. It's kind of an ego defense thing. But you can disabuse yourself of that notion. It's called the death of the false ego. And when you do, then all of a sudden you're free to use more of yourself more freely.
Yeah.
But you have to be around people you don't like for that dynamic to happen, because they're the ones that exhibit for you, hey, wait, what you thought was so awesome, you know isn't the whole picture.
I so appreciate what you're saying, because honestly, and the reason I can laugh is because there's more than once where I was like, I just really don't like that agent.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden realized that I did something that was exactly the same and went, oh, might be parts of me
Uh-huh.
that I'm not quite so fond of. And then I was like,
Yeah.
wow. And like you said, it really is where you grow and you become a better human, a better spirit.
And
I
a happier
you
one.
and a happier one. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's just, yeah. And I think that also knowing, as you said, in this lifetime, I think we can master some things. We're not going to master everything, and being
Mhm.
okay with that. Of it's going to be, might be a little
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah, with each of these, we can exercise them and they get a little more flight time, and we use all of them. But some of them, we're still, kind of a toddler with, compared to others where we're, fully adult.
That's,
Um,
that's a great way to put it. Oh my gosh. Okay, I know we're out of time, but I am so grateful. Wow, I could talk to you for hours.
it's
So
been really fun. Thank you for having me on.
thank you so much. And so please tell people how they can get a hold of you, website, social media, your podcast, everything.
Yeah, the best thing is the podcast. It's called Now I Get It with Dr. Andy. Wherever you can find podcasts, it's there.
Perfect. That sounds great. And as you know, I'm going to ask you to lift your voice and say yay with me as we go off the air. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Yay! Woohoo!
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.